Okay, so I would like to welcome you all now officially to this webinar on behalf of Women in Sustainable Finance. I know that most of you, those of you who are regular to the webinars, have not seen me as a moderator before. That is because I just became the head of the Geneva chapter for Women in Sustainable Finance. I am very, very happy and humbled and excited about that. But you might have seen me as a speaker. Why did Steve just disappear? This worries me. So our speaker seems to have momentarily gone offline. Well, see, these things would not happen in real life. He could not escape from a real panel. I'm sure he will log in again very soon. In the meantime, I will use the opportunity that he's not here to present him. So Steve has a long experience in the financial sector and in investment, and now he's working with the SDG lab in Geneva, where they are working on how to use the SDGs and specifically national SDG plans to guide financing, guide not only impact financing, but sustainable financing, and really link SDGs to ESG investing and to ESG reporting, and basically how to use the SDGs as what they are, a quite amazing tool for promoting sustainability. So Steve, I used your very brief absence to present you. I hope that's okay. And you are muted.
Yeah, sorry about
so
that.
What we'll do is we will aim at having a really interactive webinar, but obviously Steve will just give you, the basis. You will have a presentation, and then feel free to ask questions in the chat. Feel also free once we stop chatting to raise your hand and ask for the floor. And if anybody is shy, well, we will put you on the spot, but we're also completely able of just talking amongst ourselves for the next 3 hours, so don't worry about it. Steve, over to you.
Perfect, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present. This initiative is it's a partnership between the Ground Up Project, which is a company, an investment advisor in Geneva, and the SDG Lab at the UN in Geneva. And it's been funded through the SDC, which is the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation. It's for the Anglo-Saxons and the Americans, it's a USAID is the way I explain it. And the project, the roots of the project were that in 2019, there was a series of meetings that were held in Geneva to kind of bring the UN side and the investment side together to talk about sustainable development and what could be done, what's missing, what isn't working, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there was a series of conversations. They all speak different languages on those two sides of Geneva. And that, I mean, that's not our mandate, but that I see every day. It's a huge problem. I don't know how to address that, but the two sides really don't like each other too much, I found out, and maybe they don't say it, but sorry. And so at the end, the mandate was, what can we build that can help these two sides work together? And the investor side, the wealth management people at a bank, et cetera, family office were saying, well, we need deals. We need things to look at, like investments. And then the UN side was saying, hey, well, we have there's plenty of things that need to be funded, and these SDGs could help you do it. So fast forward, the pipeline builder was kind of born out of this kind of conversation. And so we have people on board that are the finance end or the investment end, Wall Street types, investment bank, that kind of stuff, and people that aren't from that side. So we are a kind of a mini version of those two sides. I should point out, having lived and worked in New York, it's the same thing in New York, in the UN office in New York, because that's up on the Upper East Side, and then downtown you have all the banks. The same language problems, the same thing. So yeah, it's only for Geneva, but you could just divide the whole world of people in sustainable development and people in finance. They just talk different languages. So fast forward a bit, our mandate was, how can we use these SDGs in a different way? Because the UN, at least our partners at the SDG lab were saying, they can be used in a better way. And that's it. So we had to start from zero to understand them, at least myself, and I'll be honest. I knew what every finance people know. 17 pretty boxes, they seem to match up against some sector. Oh, that's easy. If I invest in that, I've somehow magically connected to the SDGs, say, voila, the world is going to be wonderful. I can kind of retire. Well, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. So I'll walk you through. I'm going to start. I have to restart the screen sharing, I think. Yeah, hold on a sec. And give me a second here. So, did you see it? Yeah, okay. So this is the background. I don't think we need to talk about it too much. That's pretty much what we explained. But I think the most important thing is not all impact or kind of is the same. There is a missing element of strategicness in investments, and strategicness or thinking more clearly, and that's my key takeaway for people that are on the phone. It's like, you need to understand that there is no plan. I don't care if it's Goldman Sachs. I don't care if it's BlackRock. I don't care if it's Safra Saracen. You name the bank. They have their own vision of what they think is sustainability. Is it good? Is it bad? That's what they think it is. The SDGs could be the strategic lens that all these players use to translate their ambition of being, hey, we want to do good, into something that's more strategic. And that's hard to understand, but we'll get there. So our mandate was the emerging markets, right? Why? Because there's no money in the emerging markets from a kind of an investment management point of view. These numbers here that are on your screen are depressing at the very minimal, or an opportunity, depends how you want to look at it. This research was done by Standard Chartered Bank, which is a big British bank, investment bank, asset manager, et cetera, et cetera. They interviewed asset managers who manage 50 trillion with a T. Just to give you an idea, everyone that's in impact investing always kind of gets excited about the numbers that GIN, the Global Impact Investing Networks, throws around about the size of how big it's growing. I did some mathematics. The GIN number is approximately 1.5% of this number. To give you an idea of how little money is going where it needs to go, right? That's the problem. There's 3% in Africa. How are they ever going to make the SDGs? How are they going to ever develop, frankly, if there's not enough capital, if they themselves don't have it, right? There is a lot of capital locked up in banks, et cetera, down in all these, in the South America, et cetera. But when you look that Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa have 10% of global assets. We could do better, right? We should do better. Or we should just not try, and but we're not doing enough. That's clear, the numbers pointed out. This explains some of it's fascinating research they did, like how investors see the SDGs. And I'll just point one out because it's just like 66% of $50 trillion, because that's how you have to think about these numbers, is saying that we do not make investments that contribute to the SDGs. 66%. And then you can go through here and you can see why there's no chance that private capital will come into play to make the SDGs happen with this opinion prevailing, right? There's just, forget it. We need to do better. All right. So one part of it's not really part of a methodology, I would say, that we've developed that I'll get to, but hope for the future, because everyone needs a bit of hope, or if not, it gets depressing really fast, is these new rules that are coming out in the EU. Now, ever since I've been in impact investment, which has been a while, if you thought long enough about it, you realize that the government had to get involved and say, look, guys, these are the rules. This is what is green or what isn't green, et cetera, et cetera. And we've been waiting. The Europeans have done it. And so for me, this is a revolution that people just are kind of wrapping their head around, and it's just going to be a slow monster moving through the asset management business. I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this, but if you care about impact investing, you need to understand these rules, because every asset manager in Europe, I repeat, everyone across every asset class, debt, equity, private equity, VC, I don't care what it is. And the Swiss, because the Swiss can't get away from these rules, there's just no way. And I should say that the Americans will have to follow, because if you're BlackRock and you're sitting in New York, you cannot cut product development in two ways. Okay, oh, these are Europeans, these are not European. It's just not practical. It's just, and it's just, you're at a competitive disadvantage versus your competitors. So this is the new rules of the world. It's great. I'm so happy. Now, why am I telling you this? Because what we think, and this wasn't our idea, we heard it on a webinar somewhere during our journeys and talking. What we think will happen is, if you think about these rules are just a test of a portfolio. They're very complicated. Don't ask me the details, but the bottom line is the following. People are going to run a test on their portfolios. So I'm a portfolio manager sitting in London, in Zurich, in Stockholm, it doesn't matter. I'm going to run a test. I'm going to see that if I'm going to label my product is the fund that I'm managing, that I'm selling, I have to run this test by law, not because I feel like it. The rules are going to, when I do that test, not all the things that are inside my portfolio are going to pass that test. Why? Because Microsoft is not an impact investment. It's just not, but it's in all the portfolios probably of a lot of ESG funds, et cetera, et cetera. So what we think will happen, if you play that out a bit and you think about it, all these portfolios are going to be tested sooner or later, and there's going to be a gap between what is green and what isn't green. There's going to be a gap. There has to be, because these rules are quite tough, and there's no way. And the test will come out in a way that everything in the portfolio is green and I'm ready to go, I'm passed. No, it won't end. There's a series of case studies that have already been done. The research and the case studies are available on the UNPRI website. If you dig through there, they've run tests already, and people are coming out with like, yeah, my portfolio is like 2% passed, 5% passed, 20% passed. No one is passing. Some are passing a lot more, but you know who those are? Those are private debt and equity investors in emerging markets, because the tests they can get away. It's a bit complicated. But so what we think this is going to do is create demand for green assets. Yeah? And where could you find green assets? If you look at how if you're a fund manager, we think in the emerging markets using the SDGs. So again, not part of our methodology, but if you don't have demand, it doesn't matter what you're selling. If people are buying, it doesn't matter. If as a result of these rules, European asset managers move their allocation percentages 1%, 2% towards the emerging markets, because they see that they can kind of capture green assets in a more they need them, right? They need them to sell their products. It's quite simple. That's not 100 million more euros or that's billions of dollars of demand that'll be sitting on the table. So I think that's a very interesting, way of looking at this. All right, so let's go back to our methodology to stick to the message. So what we think is going to happen with investors now and rolling forward is that people are going to get more picky about their impact. It's not good enough that I can do it. And the University of Zurich did some research on this, and they had an interesting way of looking at it, which is the bullet point. Industry focus is now shifting from capability to effectiveness. Like how effective, how good is this impact that I'm creating? It's not going to be good enough that I just can do it. It's how good am I doing it? So what we think is, if you kind of see that kind of behind the scene, people are getting more advanced, sophisticated. People don't want greenwashing anymore. And they need something that's linked to something credible, because this idea today of I give you 1 million euros and I give you so many outputs, which is how everyone's reporting works on impact. It's a one way. There's no strategic nature to that, right? If Christina gives me all her money, I manage it, I invest it all green. I go, hey, you gave me this, you get all these things. These things have no real relationship with what's really needed. What we are proposing in our methodologies, why don't we link those outputs, right? Renewable energy created, healthcare delivered, educational services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't we link those to the SDGs? They're sitting there, but no one's doing this. So I'll get that. Not sure if that's clear, but I'm a bit. So without understanding the SDGs, it's impossible to understand our methodology. And so I know everyone's going to roll their eyes, but it is what it is. They're a universal framework. They weren't built as a marketing tool for impact managers or asset managers. That was not the objective. The objective was, how do we make a country sustainable in the long run, resilient, and how do we do it in a way that covers everything that humanity does when it does what it does every day, day in, day out. That's why they're so broad. That's why there's nothing under the sun that can't get kind of put into an SDG, an individual SDG. If I buy a house, if I drive a car, everything kind of fits under there because everything works together. But this is not something that was, again, not designed for finance. Another key point is the framework that was developed by the UN was handed over to the signatories of the treaty or the agreement. Who are the signatories? It's 193 countries. Every country has a plan, and a lot of details behind those plans. It's not just hey, we're going to do it. It's here's how we're going to do it. This is exactly where we need it. They did it, and it goes through the 17 boxes. The goals underneath, there's 169 targets and 247 indicators, which, by the way, have already been linked to the IRIS indicators. IRIS being the kind of the main impact investment indicator system that's been developed. So it's all sitting there. It's all ready to go. Measurement, and this is, I think, pretty magical. Measurement can be done, even though no one's done it yet. Measurement can be done in this simple way, and I'll give you a simple analogy. Christina comes to me and says, I need to make a clean tech investment in Vietnam. Okay, let's look at the Vietnamese SDG plan. The Vietnamese government has said clean energy is one of our priorities. Is it not? That's not really the point. If it is, I'm going to tell Christina, hey, that matches what the Vietnamese need. That matches your kind of regional focus. Okay, fine. So let's look through the plan. If you read through the plan, the Vietnamese government has detailed where they think the renewable energy needs to be developed in the north, in the south, on the west, on the types that they're missing. Is it mini grids? Is it battery storage? They've kind of they're telling us in their plan what they think they need. It's a totally ground up approach. As opposed to Christina being the fund manager in New York saying, yeah, you know what? I woke up today and I think the Vietnamese need this. It totally turns over the investment process. Now, that's if you put all those pieces together and you put it into a kind of the way that we're kind of presenting, the SDGs are a roadmap where investors can achieve risk-adjusted returns, right? Because no investor is going to invest unless they hit what target they need. We're not asking them to change, and they won't change. They have to make those returns, but they'll be able to create strategic impact in areas that are needed by that country. And they'll be able to turn that impact into something that they can measure against the country plan of Vietnam. This does not exist on planet Earth, what I just described. No one is doing this because no one understands the SDGs. We've talked to investors in New York, in Zurich, in Geneva, all over the place. No one has, I get nervous that no one knows this because I'm like, being a pioneer is no fun. Having done this one too many times, it's just no fun. But that's the fact. I don't care if it's UBS, again, they haven't, why not? I don't know. But we think that using this methodology really can create all the things we're all trying to do, right? Asset owner is happy because he or she is creating the impact that's kind of more strategic. It's in the area they want, they're getting the returns, and they can see something measurable as opposed to just kind of something metaphorical. Asset managers, the intermediaries are happy because their clients are buying their products, right? That's what they're there to do. They're not there to, they're there to sell. And people on the ground, the entrepreneurs or the project managers, they need capital. Why? Because I just showed you that there only 3% is in Africa, 5% in Latin America. So everyone, it's like a win-win-win for everyone in a way. If it only was that easy, right? So the pipeline builder, going back to our methodology, what we're trying to do, it's this in a nutshell, right? We use the country level plans as our strategic lens as a starting point. That's where we start, right? The UNDP, which is a unit, for those that don't know, it's the development program. It's one of the bigger UN agencies inside of the whole family of the UN. They have started already doing some amazing work on translating the plans. You can imagine that these plans were written by the government of all these countries. They're not really like simple to use. They're like books like this, and they have translated these into Excel sheets that show, hey, these are the 5 sectors or 5 kind of goals and sector that this country is prioritizing. It's the roadmap that I mentioned. So that piece is done. Investment brokering is just what you need to sell investments, right? There's no magic there. You need people that know how to get on the phone, call investors, and sell, because they don't sell themselves. This is kind of a tricky part for the UN people to understand, but okay. And if you put those two pieces together, we're helping guide capital where it's needed, not where some guy in New York thinks it should go, but where the people on the ground in these countries need it. And doing that will deliver the kind of 2 or 3 things that I had mentioned before. Impact that you could measure against a country plan, returns that are risk adjusted for whatever the asset class, et cetera, it is. And there's another kind of piece in there that we think, we're not sure, but we think can happen too, is that there is probably some de-risking elements that are being left on the table by investors because they just don't know to look for them. And I'll give you a simple analogy about the example about clean energy in Vietnam. I'm making this up, but I can imagine this is how it could be. Vietnam has said we need renewable energies on the west side of our country for whatever reason. So they put in place some guarantee schemes, some tax abatements, some regulatory changes, all these different pieces to kind of push people to invest over on the west of the country. It could be east, it doesn't really matter. The investor sitting in New York, he doesn't know this. He doesn't know that there's a plan. She doesn't know, never. So if she read the plan, for her investing in east and west, it's, as long as they're hitting their risk, it's a good business, good management team, et cetera, that kind of has all the criteria. It doesn't matter. But what they're not doing, they didn't realize that the investment could be de-risked. Now, in emerging markets, risk is like the biggest barrier. It's not enough entrepreneurs, not enough good deals, it's risk. There's a lot of different types of risk, but if I showed an investment manager a way to de-risk their investment, he's like, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't I want to de-risk it? So de-risking your investment, better measurement, more strategic impact, I mean, what is it? What is there not to like here? And the rest is kind of talks about our business model, but I don't think that's really the kind of fun part here. I mean, the interesting part, because this is just a standard, how investment advisory businesses work. You help people think through how they make investments, et cetera, et cetera. We're just doing it starting with the SDGs, and that's, I think, unique. Christina, I'm going to pause because, I talk a lot. This explains some more details of the process, but you tell me.
No, I think, if I can make a few initial comments, and then we can see if we get some comments from the virtual floor also.
Yeah.
And then if you can always go into more detail. First of all, I think that really using the SDGs as you're doing, some of you in the audience, and Steve for certain, know that I recently left the UN to go into private sector advisory roles. And for me, I sort of grew up with the SDGs. I've been reporting against them. I've been working on them since they came into being. And I can still remember the MDGs, which for you probably will be like, what on earth is that? And I think it's so true. It's what you're saying, Steve, is that we need to translate, because there is, first of all, they're different languages, but there's also the perception that the SDGs are nice little colored boxes, but nobody really talks about the targets, nobody really talks about the indicators, and therefore there's no deeper understanding of how useful they actually are. And they are not a magical tool. They are not the best things in sliced bread. I never liked sliced bread, so I don't understand that one, but anyhow, but they are an extremely useful tool, not only at the global level, but as you say, at national level. And I think that the way you go about it, to really see them as guidance in where do we invest and what do we invest in and how do you link this to risk, is something that for me it's almost flabbergasting that it's not done yet. But I really do think that there is this divide in the two worlds, and where the UN has done very well in communicating the fact that the SDGs are there and having governments report against them, that never really completely translated into their practical use in the investment sector. And what I just said made me think about something else I would actually like to point out, is that the governments all report against the SDGs and progress in SDGs. And for them, having private actors do the same form of reporting, that's something they would absolutely love. So at that point, also regulation becomes aligned with what private companies are doing. You mentioned the EU regulations that will be coming out now. If investors actually use the SDGs that you do, then a lot of that reporting will all of a sudden become I want to say a swear word, lot easier, because you will already be ready for that reporting, because that reporting is based on international standards that are at the basis of the SDGs. So the alignment will be there. Perhaps it will be a little bit cumbersome, but the alignment will already be there, which will make you ready for your reporting. I would also really like to ask if somebody wants to say something. Unfortunately, I can't see everybody, so if I don't know, you can perhaps type something in the chat to just say that you want to take word, and then I will make sure that I call upon you. And until that happens, I will go back to Steve.
Yeah, it sounds all easy because it all lines up. So I mean, we've done a lot of thinking on this. It's not like 5 minutes, and we actually got. Just kind of happened that there was a foundation that I knew in Switzerland who was looking to do direct impact investments in a handful of countries, and they were looking for a mechanism, and so they put out a RFP, and they're like, yeah, and do it. And so we had to kind of build the methodology to a level to pass through a foundation with quite a few assets run by some very nice but pension fund managers. And I'm like, these guys are not rookies, right? They've been out there. So we threw a lot of thinking into how all the steps that you need to do. At the end, we didn't get the assignment. They changed their plans, et cetera, et cetera. But that's why I'm pretty confident that if in detail, like, yeah, it's pretty ready for prime time. It is, because we had to think. You can't deliver that level of work to a foundation without thinking it through. And the team has a pretty wide background of between, you know, how the investment process works, to asset management, to selling, to the SDGs and government. So it's just my fear is that, you know, people just don't listen. Honestly.
I have to say, I do think that people listen, but I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. Because, for instance, on the European rules, as you say, yes, they're coming out of the EU, but they will have worldwide impact.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's no way about that.
The Americans are behind because they've just behind, and they have a different philosophy on how to regulate the financial markets. They're going to follow, but there's no choice. They have no choice. I don't see how they can get away with it. And I should say that I asked a question to some of the people that we work with at the UN. I go, is there a possibility? The premise of the EU rules is we want to prevent greenwashing. That's one of their main things. And I read this in all the research I did on it. So if you're one of those people, you know, they're really focused on ESG, the rules right now, the EU taxonomy, all this is really squarely focused at the ESG. But it doesn't take a genius to think that there's other words out there that financial players are using to sell products, like impact, like the SDGs. So I'm not surprised if somewhere down the line, it has to be on the agenda of thinking, and someone at the UN kind of gave me this sort of like, but my interpretation was that those words, labels are inside the framework of the UN, or the EU. So if they start saying this is what impact is, and this is what the SDGs are from a financial product point of view, that's great. But wow, that is a revolution.
But also because the EU rules are supposed to be on all, it's not only supposed to be on investments that are labeled ESG or sustainable, it's supposed to be mainstreamed.
Right.
Which is also, it's going to be a rollout, but I also think, as you're saying, it's also a question of being ready, because I do not think that the EU, I worked with the EU Commission on many issues for many years, and I don't think that their main target right now is to change the world from one day to another, or to slap companies with massive fines because they can't report on something. I think they really also want to have more transparency, and it's not only on greenwashing, it's on every possible form of washing, but it's also, I think, partially educational. Because there is a question, they will also come out in 2022 now with human rights due diligence in supply chains. And that's linked, because you cannot say that you do sustainable investment if you also don't then expect from your investees that they do their human rights due diligence in their supply chain. And that will also have a worldwide trickle out effect. So all of these things completely link up. And the thing is that if we can manage to actually get people to use the SDGs as a basis, because the SDGs, contrary to the MDGs, are very much based in international standards. And that's what's in the head of the EU regulators and legislators.
Yeah, there was an interesting, when we were writing some of the pieces that we've been distributing lately, we found, someone shared with me that the European, it's like the FIMNA of Europe, I just don't remember the acronym. There was a group that put out a call for the international financial standards. These are the guys. This is like the European or the world version of GAAP accounting. For those that the European regulators said that they actually mentioned, and I have the quote if someone wants it. We think that the SDGs should be used inside. It was amazing, because you've got this. It's a big a big step for a financial regulator. These people aren't, they're not, they're just trying to regulate markets. They don't understand, to say, hey, the SDGs should be involved in the standards. If you're going to create standards that have something to do with sustainability for companies and investments, et cetera, the SDGs need to be inside that mix. I think that's pretty good news, because again, these are like a roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also 360 degrees, because they're not only environment. And that's the thing that I think that it's a pity that very often goes underreported, is the good effects also that sustainable or that any investment has on things that go beyond, for instance, the right to clean water, where everybody's very happy to then put up the little colored thing on clean water. I don't remember the number, quite honestly. But what they then don't report on is the trickle-out effects that will have on, for instance, healthcare, or health level, educational level. So, and there also you can see this profound lack of understanding of how they are actually connected.
Yeah, and at the same time that there's good news, there's bad news. I was reading, there's a new group, no names, of course, that are launching ratings. And they're kind of saying that they're more than just ESG ratings. They're doing it more sophisticated, et cetera. They sent me through LinkedIn kind of a case study, and I looked at it and I went straight to the SDG methodology, and it was the same as everyone else. And I'm like, wow, if these guys who are new, so they're not coming from Bloomberg, MSCI, kind of the old, because ESG has been around for quite a bit. It's nothing new. Frankly, I think it's just people excited about it today, but it's been around for 10, 15 years. But they're not, the SDG methodology was just the same vanilla. And that's the downside about these things, because if you're an investment manager and you've invested in, pick your listed company, it is super complicated to show how that company. And I don't have an answer for that. If someone asked me, well, how would you do it? Here's a portfolio. Can you help me map it? You'd have to drill into every country, every company, look at where they're selling their products. So by country, the data exists, right? Companies report, they can report by countries, et cetera, but it would be a monumental hassle. But no one said this was easy. No. And, it's always funny when people come to, they jump into impact investing or whatever. It's like, first you have to learn investing first, and then you get here, and then you're going to have to learn about sustainability, because no one understands anything about it, because we understand numbers. That's what we were.
No, exactly. And I actually say very often these days that I think it's really unfair that all of a sudden people who understand investment are being asked to understand sustainability, because I'm sorry, but that's not even just one profession, it's many professions. I mean, and you need a little bit more than, just having just come out of university or with some degree in sustainability to understand how this actually works in the field, as we sustainability people say. And definitely, I mean, those are two areas that you need to link up. And I think that a lot of companies and investment companies and asset managers need to realize that they need that sort of professionalism in-house. And it's not because it's a buzzword that we need to promote somebody who's been doing accounting for the past 20 years and up for promotion, and then we slap sustainability director, that they will actually understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, you can learn about it, but it's like having you need to read a lot. Like, I'm no expert. Of course
you need to read a lot, and you also perhaps need to do a little bit of due diligence and sort of like travel around the world to figure out what actually makes sense. Exactly, why do the SDG national plans look like they do? Why do they differ? In order to understand that. Yeah. I mean, I also see a lot of sustainability reports where it's all about, we work towards the SDGs, so nice, lovely statement. And then basically our investees all follow, or a company says follow national labor legislation in our supply chain. And you're like, well, that's in many areas of the world really not working towards the SDGs, because in many areas of the world, national labor legislation is not up to standards of working towards the SDGs. So the maximum that statement actually means is that at least you're not investing in criminal enterprises. Yoo-hoo! I mean, yeah, not really working towards anything. But you need a lot of sustainability knowledge to actually get that. So there's also,
but it exists, right? There's plenty of people out there, right?
Of course there is.
Right, of course.
There is.
Okay,
I mean, and some of them are even like quite competent, but there's no dialogue.
Yeah, and that goes back to the beginning of the conversation tonight, is that, think about it, like the people are sitting in Geneva and they're like, we got development people on one side and finance people on another, and they can't talk to each other. They cannot, they talk and it's, it passes. So I don't, you know,
well, hey, we managed to talk to each other and somehow understand each other.
Yes.
I feel that we are monopolizing. Do you want to speak a little bit about the investment process? And then I really hope somebody's going to speak.
Yeah, the investment process is quite detailed, and I don't think it's, unless someone says, yeah, I want to see it.
I want to see it.
Okay.
Yeah. It seems I'm the only one speaking.
So, no, that's fine. I mean, I've simplified it, right, to make it simple to get to the point faster. Because
so that even I understand it. That's what
it's too hard. So you're my investor, right? So hey, what kind of sectors are you interested in, right? Because you want to invest, you want to do something good, you're looking for sustainable product investments, etc. But at the end, you're going to tell me a couple things: the regions and the sectors, right? Those are, at the end, those are the two things. It could be debt, it could be equity, but that's just too much for tonight. So we're gonna match what you're looking for as best we can with the country plans that you're telling me, the countries you want to work in. So in the case of this foundation, this foundation was saying we're looking for, and I don't know how much details, but they gave us 5 countries: Colombia, Tanzania, Ghana, et cetera, and they were doing work with youth, very specific things in youth. So without giving all those details, you'd have to understand what they're looking for. That's their investment criteria, or their theory of change, which is another way of saying it. And then matching a bit, doing a bit of a match between the countries they want, that they've said. They could, assuming that they give you a list, and you'd look, are these the priorities of those governments first? Because that's the first dialogue you got to say. Because if the investor says, oh, I want to do, educational investments in Sweden, does Sweden need investments in education? Probably not. I don't think so. I mean, I think they're pretty much, I'm sure they report on this, and they're pretty high to the, like, we're good. So that dialogue is a bit delicate there. But hopefully you get across a kind of a match between what the investors in theory looking for and the SDGs of those countries. But that's a bit of a big Excel sheet operation to match the two, right? So once you've done that, you can, you looked at the UNDP data that kind of shows the priorities in a simple way, so it's easy to understand for us to use. You kind of matched the two. And that's what this is what does. And once you've matched the criteria of the investor with those particular SDGs translated through the UNDP data into a sector, you can match that, any deal in that sector, to the country's indicator, target, goal, right? You're guaranteed to make that connection. It's a bit mathematical, but you can do it. So once you've done that, you go back to the country and you go shopping for investments. Say, voila, it's not so mythical. How could you do that? Well, I gave you the example of Vietnam. In our particular case, in the business model, we don't think that we can be everywhere in every country, because it's impossible. So we think, and this is the brokering side of the model, we think that we need to find local investment advisors in Vietnam, because they're there, they're super talented, and they know the market better than any guy in Zurich. Sorry, that's a bit of a kind of a crazy idea for a lot of people, but this foundation that I mentioned, that's what they're doing. They're not using us, but they found a local advisor in the country, one country. They're going to partner with them, so they've kind of cut everyone out, and they're going direct with the local advisor. That local advisor, I call them, I go, hey, we're looking for this type of deal, this size, shape, it's just a shopping list. That's the criteria. He comes back with a list which we've done this already. It looks like an Excel sheet. Here are the deals. And you've mapped out a kind of investable universe, and then you just follow an investment process. It's not very magical, because we can't build, if we build something that doesn't fit in terms of how investors work, forget it. So right here, I kind of just showed you. You look at the priorities of the country, you do the sector analysis. Do we do it? Does the local guy do it? It's the same idea, right? You've mapped out the ecosystem. All these countries have accelerators, incubators, this network, local angel investment. There's plenty of ecosystems to tap into, right? Because we're bringing the money from, let's say, from Europe in this case. And then you put it all together, and it just it turns into an investment process. It's just that these SDGs are kind of the driver. You kind of mash the SDGs and the investment criteria together. Maybe it's not going to match. So then you're going to have a discussion saying, look, Mr. Investor, sorry, we're not going to help you make an educational investment in Sweden. But what about Mexico? Look at Mexico. It needs this. It's got some great kind of companies. So that's a bit of the salesmanship part of the model, but investments don't sell themselves. So you need someone to and then you just kind of walk through the cycle, as I said, and it turns into like a classical funnel process, which is how all investments across any asset class are made. You build a universe with the process, and you go down to all the due diligence that would be done. This is all it's standard. You do some ESG due diligence, impact due diligence, financial due diligence. You have to do that. You can't do it without that. Whoa, that's my last slide. And that's it. There's not more magic than that. But what I just described to you, and I know this is kind of a big statement, it does not exist anywhere on planet Earth, because no one is looking at these SDGs like this. There could be someone out there, frankly. I don't know. We couldn't talk to anyone. But look at the data that the research that Standard Chartered did. Those guys, Standard Chartered talked to the top 300 asset managers in the world. I can't call them. They're not going to pick up the phone for me, but they picked up the phone for them. You saw go back to what they said about the SDGs. It's that's what we're up against. 66% do not make investments that contribute to the SDGs. 55 believe that they're not relevant to investments, mainstream. Well, what if and so how do you defeat that? It's tough.
I think, partially with what we're doing here, trying to really show how they are a very useful guide and tool. As you say, it's a roadmap. Translation, as we're doing here, into what they actually mean. I also really, I agree completely with you that what's going to come out of the EU is going to create a massive focus.
That's
and
the driver.
SDGs are super helpful. And I think that there's a lot of fear in the investment sector on when you really start talking sustainability, because as we said, people are not sustainability professionals. It's like if you all of a sudden ask me to start making investments, right, based on return on investment, I would be utterly, again, I want to say a swear word, lost.
I'll let you in one secret on investment people that work in an investment bank and asset manager, because that was me. I did this. We are taught to give you an answer. We are taught from day one to have an answer to any question that someone asks us, because that's what we're getting paid to do. So it's counterintuitive for us to say, hold on, I don't understand, I'll get back to you. That's just not what we do.
Exactly.
I'm sure people would argue and this and that, but at the end, so that's why
I just got a question from Christine saying there are several asset managers with SDG lens funds, for instance, Robeco and Bamboo Capital.
No.
What's the pioneering aspect here? Is it tying the SDGs to national policy ambitions? We've tried that approach since 2015, but risk remains the issue in emerging markets. I'm hopeful that the legislation will upend the risk model or nothing will change.
The risk model, the SDGs by themselves can't make a country less risky, right? There's going to be political risk, legal risk, currency risk, all the risks you can think of. That's just, there's not much they're going to do. That it is what it is. But what we showed you tonight, and I know the guys at Bamboo, Rebecca, Sam, I know them and I know their products. I'd be surprised if they're doing this. Frankly, I hope they are, frankly, that'd be great. And Bamboo is probably on the leading edge of all these people because they're very different than Rebecca Sam and with the markets, etc. But what we just showed you tonight is that if you look at these plans, if you go down to that level and you look at, there are for sure some de-risking mechanisms on the table that you did not take into account. So is that the solution to every risk problem with an emerging market? Absolutely not. But is it better than where you are today? Absolutely yes. So it's just investors need to know to look, and today they're not educated to know that, whoa, I could have invested over there and got a discount, or I got a tax abatement, a guarantee program, this, that. I had a conversation with a pretty well-known fund, and when I mentioned the UN to him, his hair stood up like this because he's like, oh, I don't want to deal with these people. And it's this attitude. It's like, and that's a human problem. Like this, I told him, I go, I understand, but what if I told you that you could make a less risky investment? Then he's like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Well, if the plan and then it could work like this, would that be interesting to you? Ah, okay, but now that I didn't know that. I didn't know that existed. I didn't know there was a national plan. Well, Mr. Investor, well, let me tell you. So, but that's one by one conversation at a time. It's not a 5-minute, okay, plug and play and we're done.
No, and I think, and you're absolutely true. I think there's a little bit of for those who actually do use the SDGs in a holistic way, I do also think that there is this lack of understanding that the SDGs cannot just be like on every country in the same way, and that's exactly why every country is doing the national plan. So it's also not only national policy ambitions, it's actually an analysis for each country of what is the SDGs that we need to focus on, where is our gap, where is it that we need investment in order to work as a nation towards the SDGs, and what is the investment that we need, what are the policies that we need. So it's more than policy ambitions is national plan.
For me, I having worked in plenty of banks and stuff like this, until that policy and those rules change and the hammer comes down in that way, nothing will change. I'm just a bit cynical because I'm too old. But when it does, and they realize that their product is, and the UN calls Rebecca Sam, I can imagine this conversation. I'm just going to, hey, Mr. Rebecca Sam, hi, this is the EU. Your product can't say sustainable. But no, we know what we're doing. It's totally sustainable. I just saw your results. It's 20% of your product, your fund investments are sustainable, whatever, and the rest is not. So you can't use a sustainable label. What's Rebecca Sam going to do? They're going to hire a team of sustainability people like in 2 seconds to get, and then they're going to realize then the next problem, having again been around for a while, there are not enough green assets in the north. Sorry, it just, what you're going to buy everything through, chemical companies are not sustainable. Microsoft, not sustainable. And I can go down a list of all the things that are not. So that should move the needle to, hey, maybe a soybean, plant in Ghana that we've looked at. I just saw an interesting renewable energy fund for the Caribbean. I mean, there's, and I think that's what's going to happen because they have no choice.
No, exactly. And I also think that what another thing, well, there will be no choice, is to look more holistically and not only focus on green funds, but say, okay, so yes, you invested in solar panels, very nice. How were they produced in Libya by Nigerian slaves? Less sustainable than you might have thought. So I think that's also something that will really change over the coming, let's say.
Well, there's going to be a competition. I mean, if today you have 3% of assets in Africa, and now you've allocated another 1 or 2 or 3%, so all of a sudden there's double the pool of demand for the supply, right? The demand being the buyers of the investors. They're going to have to go. Not everyone's going. Right now people just are happy to do microfinance and say, okay, I'm done. I've done enough. But that's like one simple. What about everything else that you could help to fund? education, et cetera, et cetera. So,
and another thing that this approach also brings you out of is exclusion and investing sustainably by exclusion. But actually, it gives you the possibility to open up your portfolio and say, look, for instance, investing in a mine in this area, if I put up certain conditions that help fulfill the right to decent work, for instance, is actually a really good idea, and is a really good idea for the local economy. And by the way, minerals and mining, and it's usually a pretty good return on investment, you know.
Yeah, it's not perfect. There's no way that we can say it's perfect, but
the world is not perfect.
Right. But
I mean, we can't. I actually once, by complete chance, ended a webinar by saying we cannot continue to have our head up in the sky while we then just accept that the world is a living hell or something like that.
You know what I tell people?
Exactly.
I tell people we're just throwing darts today. We are literally throwing darts at the wall on a kind of and do we have any idea what we're doing is making an impact? No, there's no way we do, because there's no linking to what people need, which is where the impact is created. It's not, remember, the impact is made by the company that's creating the product or the service on the ground, not in New York or Zurich. That's just the money. And I think we forget that it's the entrepreneurs, the people on the ground. That's where, you know, the impact that everyone wants.
Yeah, and also we want to have more systematic sustainability, and not only focus on impact investment.
And that's the other thing we say. We think using the SDGs is a systematic way to do it, because it you know, allows everyone to play their role, but in a systematic approach, as opposed to the dart throwing approach, which is not so great. All right.
And with that, we are just out of time. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure, as always, talking with you. I know that the two of us monopolized a little bit, but hey, we are great talkers, and it's very hard to stop us.
We're educating.
Exactly. So I really hope that it was still very, very useful for all of those of you who listened. If you need to be put in touch with Steve, then please get in touch with us in Women in Sustainable Finance, and we will facilitate that. And you can obviously always find him on LinkedIn also. Thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you so much.